Does Hollywood have a problem with autism? By which I mean, isn't it about time that Hollywood and other filmmakers for that matter start giving us authentic autistic characters, characters who are and who talk about being autistic? So, fairly recently, I watched a film called A Real Pain, which is probably quite a weird place to start for this video, given that it's a movie with no autistic characters, but bear with me because it will make sense. So, A Real Pain stars Jesse Eisenberg and Kieran Culkin as cousins David and Benji, and together they're going on a heritage tour of Poland in honour of their dead grandmother. So it's pretty clear from the offing that both David and Benji are dealing with really quite distinct mental health conditions. And I have to say, for a while, I was really wondering if David was also an autistic-coded character. However, it was really refreshing actually to see a little later on in the film. David was sat with a table of near strangers, really, and he started sharing the fact that he deals with anxiety. He speaks about his complicated feelings towards his cousin, but he also shares that he has OCD. And I found this really inspiring because how often, really, do we see characters on screen talking authentically about their mental health or any conditions they may have? Jesse Eisenberg himself is open about having OCD, and I think this is one of the reasons why this was handled so well in A Real Pain. The actor himself was bringing his own personal experiences to the role, and it was dealt with really sensitively, and therefore it felt really authentic. So it got me thinking about autistic representation in films and TVs, and the fact that there are just so few actually autistic characters out there. And by this I mean characters who are actually confirmed to be autistic through storytelling. Very often we're left with trying to figure out our own headcanon, aren't we, as to what characters we believe to be autistic coded, because we can resonate with their traits and behaviours in some way. But I would like to see more honesty from the creators of these particularly autistic coded characters, for them to tell us that they're autistic characters. I feel like not only would it be a great thing in terms of autistic representation for those of us who know that we are autistic or have been diagnosed as autistic, but it would also be an educational opportunity for those who don't know very much about autism, and also for those who don't know they're autistic, and to have opportunities to see characters on screen that they perhaps can resonate with. I just feel like it's such a lost opportunity for all of those reasons. And when we consider how many autistic people there are out there in the world, firstly, it's really difficult to know because we're just catching up, aren't we? There are very many people now realising they're autistic later in life. So it's going to be some time before we actually have prevalence rates. For quite some time now, we've been relying on the figure of around 1 in 100 people could be autistic, but of course the figure is likely to be much higher. And although there seems to be constant research into this, I think it will be some time before we have reliable figures. And if you consider that there are just over 8.2 billion people in the world, if 1 in 100 of those are autistic, we're talking about 82 million autistic people, although again, the actual number is likely to be much higher. So that's a lot of autistic people who need representation on screen. We need visibility, and I know that disability as a whole is poorly represented in film and TV, but I would just implore filmmakers and creators of these characters to be more curious and to want to create authentic and believable characters to the very demographics that they're supposed to represent. So, in terms of autistic representation in film, I think we can all agree this is pretty much a grey area, isn't it? Because there are so few actually autistic characters in film, characters who essentially are confirmed to be autistic within the context of the storytelling. And don't get me wrong, I think it is a real challenge to get autistic representation right, because there will never be a character that we all resonate with, because we are all so different as autistic people. But I think they can be doing a hell of a lot better than they have been doing until now. So, while we're talking about autistic representation in film, I do reluctantly have to mention Rain Man here. And Rain Man is a film that was released in 1988, and this was at a time when the general public knew very little about autism. And I watched Rain Man the other day for the purposes of this video, because it's been around, I don't know, 20 years since I've seen this film, so I had forgotten quite a lot of it. And it was, I have to say, a really uncomfortable experience. So the film focuses on Raymond Babbitt, who is an autistic savant, and his brother Charlie. And this is confirmed by Dr. Brunner. So this is actually quite a rare example of the audience being told that this character is autistic. And for the most part of the film, Raymond is abused by his brother. It's very clear that Charlie considers his brother as really annoying, and he calls him awful names through this film. And I found it really shocking. And when you consider that this was a mainstream film, is a mainstream film, what message does that send out to the audience? That it's okay to bully autistic people because we're annoying? Charlie only shows Raymond any iota of respect when he's able to deduce that Raymond can help him get out of debt by going along to the casino with him and counting cards. And while towards the end of the film we see Charlie becoming a little more accepting of his brother, there is never a sense of regret or remorse at his abusive behaviour towards Raymond. There is never a sense of true atonement. So Rain Man is a dreadful example of autistic representation, and even the portrayal of Raymond feels like autistic savant cosplay. It is so uncomfortable to watch. It just feels to me that this film is a relic of a dark and not so distant past, and that's absolutely where it belongs. So I'm going to move on to The Accountant now, because I wanted to include a kind of recent example of an autistic character. And I do appreciate that this film is, 9 years old, but there has been a recent sequel made to this film. So it does feel like the character of Christian Wolff, of course played by Ben Affleck, is a current autistic character in terms of pop culture. And I mean a character who is confirmed as autistic in terms of storytelling. So, I watched The Accountant the other night, and the first thing that I should say, incidentally, is that there will be some mild spoilers for The Accountant, and there probably will be mild spoilers for anything that I discuss in any depth today, because I have to really, because these are, either autistic or autistic-coded characters. So yeah, The Accountant. I have to say that I really struggled with this film. I just really wanted to watch The Day of the Jackal all through this film because it is a better film, but that's an aside. We're talking about autistic representation here. So the character of Christian Wolff is another autistic savant who is an accountant, and he is also a hitman. And gosh, for me, I just felt like the character is as close to a superhero as you can get in human form. So it really feels like they're tapping into the whole kind of superpower thing, or the whole autism is a superpower thing, which I am deeply uncomfortable with. And it feels like the fact that he's an autistic savant is being used as a kind of niche plot device, again, to make him almost superhuman, but it really does feel like the whole autistic character is being used purely for entertainment. There's nothing for me really below kind of surface level. Yes, we are given some backgrounds into Christian's childhood and the difficulties that he experienced, but it just fell kind of fell flat as an autistic representation, and there wasn't anywhere enough nuance for me because yeah, he was just, you know, a big tough guy who had a phenomenal ability with maths. And interestingly, there is a scene where the child version of Christian completes a jigsaw puzzle. And I do understand that some autistic people may find meaning in the jigsaw puzzle piece, particularly those that are diagnosed later in life. It might have some meaning to them, but when it comes to autistic children, the jigsaw puzzle piece is really problematic. And I saw a variant of the poster for The Accountant along with some other branding, which includes puzzle pieces within it. And I just thought, what an odd decision to make. It doesn't take a lot to research these things. We know that the jigsaw puzzle piece is really troubling for lots of autistic people. And the last thing I'll mention about The Accountant, and to be honest, I can't believe they did this, but as an autistic person, I really struggle with bright lights and strobing in particular, and there are two scenes in this film with really quite intense strobing going on. So for me, this is not a film that's been designed with autistic people in mind because I found these scenes painful to look at. So for me, it's just another action movie that's been designed for neurotypical people, but I do need to say that this is just my take on The Accountant. I'm sure there are autistic people who really enjoyed the film, and if you are one of them, let me know down below. And also, if you'd like to see a full review video from me on The Accountant and perhaps the sequel, let me know down below. But I'm just really hoping that there's no strobing sequences in the second film. So Rain Man and The Accountants are probably the most mainstream movies, aren't they, when it comes to including autistic characters. But if this is what mainstream autistic representation looks like, i.e. white male autistic savants, is it any wonder that so many of us are told, "You don't seem autistic to me"? However, if you delve a bit deeper, there are a few other examples of films that have actually autistic characters. Not very many, however, but there are one or two. And I'm going to talk about two in brief now because I do want to come back to these films in a forthcoming video about films that are perhaps lesser known. And the first is Mary and Max, and this is such a charming film. It's obviously claymation, and the character of Max is openly autistic. We see him writing letters to his pen pal Mary, and he's really open about his autistic traits and his whole experience of being autistic. And I would love to see more films like this. And the second film is Mozart and the Whale, and both the protagonists in this film are openly autistic. It focuses more on a romance between the two, and interestingly, the characters are based on a real life couple, although the story is in the main fictional. However, this film is around 20 years old now, so it is a bit dated, so I would love to see it either remade or reimagined for a new audience, but I'll talk more about this in a future video. So I'm going to move on to autistic-coded characters now, because I think this is what we're typically used to seeing in films because there are so few actually confirmed autistic characters. And it just seems like such a cop-out to me because it's almost like the writers want all of the benefits of autistic traits, such as, I don't know, social awkwardness or eccentricity, but none of the responsibility of saying to the world, this is my interpretation of an autistic person. So it's like if they receive any criticism or pushback, their get out will always be, well, this character's not actually autistic. And of course, I am not saying that every autistic character out there should disclose that they're autistic, because that would be preposterous. But now and again, it'd be really nice. And I should acknowledge that we do have far better understanding of autism now than we did, say, a decade or two ago. And this is largely due to the updated guidance on autism in the DSM. And of course, during the pandemic, very many autistic people realised that they were autistic. So there is so much more awareness and information out there on what autism is, and of course what it isn't. So now is the time for filmmakers to start creating believable autistic characters. I think also it's really important to say that if a character is clearly autistic-coded, but they don't say that they're autistic through storytelling, or they choose not to divulge that they're autistic, what message does this then send out to autistic people? That they shouldn't divulge that they're autistic, that they should hide their autism, that they should continue masking? For me, it just sends out a really troublesome message. Do TV shows fare any better when it comes to autistic representation? I do think there are some glimmers of hope out there, and I'm going to talk about 3 shows now, and they were all made here in the UK, and I do appreciate that a third of you watching are based in the US, which is the largest group, and the UK comes in at number 2, but I do want to talk about them because all 3 of these shows are examples of female representation in terms of autistic characters, so I do think they're worth a watch if you are able to track them down. And the first is Dinosaur. And this is a show that I suspect very few of you have even heard of, let alone seen, because it was a show that was quietly released by BBC Scotland last year in 2024. But I have to say, for the most part, I really, really liked it. And Dinosaur was written by Matilda Curtis and Ashley Storey. And Ashley Storey is herself an autistic woman, and she plays the protagonist Nina. So for me, it was immediately interesting. We have an autistic woman who has created an autistic character, and she's playing the character as well. So I really enjoyed it. It is a sitcom, so it is played with humour. And I just liked how kind of relaxed it all seemed. It just felt like, for me anyway, the character felt like it was really well kind of thought out. And what I think is really impressive about Dinosaur is that in episode 1, the character of Nina tells us she's autistic. Well, she's actually reminding her colleague that she's autistic, but I was honestly blown away by this, because how often does this happen in storytelling on screen? It's just such a rare occurrence, isn't it? But I was kind of immediately sold on it as a result of that. I just found that transparency just utterly refreshing. And it's not a perfect show. I think if I were to give this show a critique, it may well be along the lines of Nina's work life, because she's a paleontologist, hence Dinosaur. And she's doing really well in her work life, but we know that very many autistic people really struggle when it comes to work. So, you know, that's the one kind of critique that I'd give it. I do appreciate that storytellers have to have various plots going on, so they're able to keep the story moving forward and creating enough interest for the viewers. So I do fully appreciate why they made that decision. And for me, the character felt really interesting because we see Nina openly stim, and we see her have various kind of awkward social interactions. So for me, she felt certainly more fully formed an autistic character than we're used to seeing. And in fact, Nina really reminded me of somebody I know who is autistic, so she gets, a big tick from me. And next up is a show called Patience. And Patience is essentially a remake of a show called Astrid A. Raphael. And I haven't seen this show yet, so it is on my watch list. And the character of Patience is a police archivist, and she's also an autistic woman. And again, this is confirmed to us in episode 1 as we witness Patience going to a group for autistic adults. So for me, this is just really encouraging to get this clarification that Patience is explicitly an autistic character. And as the series goes on, we understand that Patience has a special interest in puzzles and she has phenomenal attention to detail. But I have to say, this is the show that I liked least out of the 3 that I'm mentioning today. I think because it seemed to focus more on Patience's autistic traits and less on Patience as a person. So I think it felt a bit forced at times because of this. And I think also a problem with this show is that Patience doesn't really feel like the main protagonist in this show. It's almost like at times we're observing her through other characters' eyes, which is a position that I didn't really like. I would much rather see Patience up front as the main character. And whilst she is a subordinate to what seems like the main character, D.I.B. Metcalf, the very fact that this show is named Patience would suggest to the viewer that this show is more about this character. But as life imitates art, or as art imitates life in this instance, I can imagine that many autistic people can relate to feeling like a second tier kind of person. So perhaps this dynamic is more realistic after all. Who knows? One thing that I did like, however, is that the character of Patience is played by an autistic actor called Ella Maisie Purves. And this is the ideal, isn't it? It just makes sense to have autistic actors play autistic characters because they can bring a lifetime of knowledge and experience of being autistic to the role. I was interested to see that Patience has been renewed for a second series, but I just hope in series 2 that far more emphasis is put on the character of Patience, as she's the titular character after all. For me personally, I get the sense that the makers of Patience, one of whom is openly autistic, Daniela De Winter, have tried to use the series of Patience as a way of perhaps educating neurotypical people about autism, even if it's been clumsy and a bit uninspired in its execution. But because of this, I think I'm happy to give season 2 a chance and with an open mind. So the next show I want to discuss is Film Club. And Film Club is a really new show. It was only actually released by the BBC this month, but it was co-written by Amy Lou Wood and Ralph Davis. And the show focuses mainly on the friendship between 2 characters, being Evie and Noah. And they both have a keen interest in films, so they watch a movie together in Evie's garage every week, sometimes with some other friends as well, but that's essentially why it's called Film Club. So as the series progresses, we understand that the character of Evie is going through some kind of mental health challenges. She had a breakdown at work, and she's also struggling with agoraphobia, so her friendship with Noah is really important to her. But what is really interesting about this show is that Amy Lou Wood herself was diagnosed with ADHD and autistic traits, and I think she has been advised to go for an autism assessment. So the character of Evie is essentially subconsciously based on herself. Amy has confirmed that Evie is autistic, and she's essentially trying to work through this, and she's in a position where she understands her differences from other people, and she's essentially trying to work out why. Now, the character of Evie, nor any other characters for that matter, ever mention the words autism or ADHD in the show. which would usually frustrate me given that she is supposed to be a neurodivergent woman. But for me, Film Club gets a pass because I think Evie is in a stage where she's really trying to find things out, as many late diagnosed or late realised autistic people do. So she's going through a process of perhaps self-discovery and self-exploration. So I think for me, if this show were to be commissioned for series 2, which I really hope it is, that we get to hear characters say the words autism and ADHD, because I think it's really important, both in terms of representation for autistic people, ADHD people, but also opening up a conversation for people who aren't autistic, who don't have ADHD, so they perhaps better understand the motivations of the character and perhaps why they behave in the ways that they do. I think this would be a really valuable opportunity, and particularly because the character of Evie has been created by an autistic ADHD woman. And another point that I wanted to mention about Film Club is that Evie's friend Noah is himself very autistic-coded. So for me, I'm really interested to see exploration of these characters and how they evolve through storytelling. So, how can autistic representation be best achieved? Well, I think it's pretty obvious that there needs to be far more involvement and consultation with autistic people in order to create believable, authentic characters. Personally, I'd like to see far more autistic writers be commissioned to make films and TV shows, such as we've seen with Dinosaur and Film Club. It's just really refreshing to hear these autistic voices. But I think in terms of Hollywood and mainstream films in general, there has to be far more consultation going on, because it really feels like they're relying on stereotypes and tropes about autistic people even now in 2025. And we've seen with Christian Wolff in The Accountant that this is clearly a character that, not very many autistic people are going to resonate with, really. And personally, for me, I don't need to see bombastic films like The Accountant. I would much rather see really sensitively written stories and characters, such as in A Real Pain, which I mentioned at the beginning of this video, because I think it would be an amazing opportunity to hear autistic voices. And this makes me think of Inside Our Autistic Minds, which was another show made by the BBC in 2023, and it was presented by Chris Packham, who himself is an autistic adult. The show featured 4 autistic people: Anton, Murray, Ethan and Flo, and through collaboration with the show's creative team, each autistic person made their own individual short film, highlighting their own individual experience as an autistic person. They are all available to see on the iPlayer, but if I can find them on YouTube, I will link them down below, but they are all so worth watching. And Murray is a higher support needs, non-speaking autistic adult, and he uses a tablet as a communication device. And together with the team, he was able to produce something that was just utterly beautiful and really thought-provoking. His short film relied on a lot of stop frame animation techniques, so it was really visually appealing, but more importantly, it was just such a fabulous way of communicating Murray's message and the struggles he faces as a non-speaking autistic adult. So for me, this was just a brilliant creative way of exploring ways to give a voice to an autistic person without a voice. So for me, this really does evidence that creative collaboration with autistic adults really can and does work, and I would love to see so much more of this in filmmaking. In terms of autistic characters, it is so important to have autistic actors play these roles. Not only because they'd no doubt do a better job, but also we know that autistic people really struggle when it comes to work. And I know for me, whenever I see a neurotypical person play an autistic character, it just feels like another opportunity that's been taken away from an autistic person. And we know that autistic people really struggle when it comes to work. And these are some key findings from last year's Buckland's reports. And I think it's just shocking to know that just 3 in 10 autistic people are in work. And also, I want to see stories with more than one autistic person. We know that it's very likely that autistic people will have other autistic people in their families. Autistic people gravitate towards other autistic or neurodivergent people in terms of friendship, and I'd love to see this reflected in storytelling. It's almost like we need an autism version of the Bechdel test. And if you haven't heard of the Bechdel test, it's essentially about representation of women in film, because so many women characters either talk about a man or trying to get a man or are motivated by a man, and it's really tiresome, isn't it? So this test is designed to really try and cut through all of that and to find out which films are actually woman-centric. So for a film to pass the Bechdel test, it needs to meet 3 criteria, the first of which is the film must feature 2 women characters, and some people stipulate that these characters must be named, which I'm inclined to agree with. These women must talk to each other, and the conversation cannot be about a man. So an example of a film that passes the Bechdel test is Thelma and Louise. Another is Barbie, but I will say that Barbie does annoy some people, I've noticed online, because every female character is called Barbie. So if we were to have an autism variant of the Bechdel test, it might look something like this. The film must have 2 openly autistic characters, and again, I think ideally they should be names. The characters must communicate with each other, and this could be through talking or texting or a speaking or communication device. And it must be about something other than a neurotypical person. So this is just for a bit of fun, but if we think about the TV shows and films I've discussed in today's video, firstly, Rayman, and this obviously wouldn't meet this set of criteria. Raymond is the only autistic person in this film, and we only ever see Raymond interact with his brother Charlie or Charlie's girlfriend Susanna. So Rayman gets a fail. And moving on to the accountants, and I am going to give a bit of a spoiler here, so if you haven't seen the film and you do want to, I'd suggest you skip ahead to the next one. And to my chagrin, I think this film may well meet this set of criteria. Firstly, we have Christian Wolff, who is a confirmed autistic character. And we also have the character of Justine, who is a non-verbal autistic person. So although she isn't ever explicitly mentioned as autistic in the film, I think it really is quite obvious that she's a non-verbal autistic person. And it's revealed later in the film that Justine is communicating with Christian through the aid of a communication device, and it's a computer in this instance. So yeah, I think the accountant gets a pass. So let me know if you think differently. And moving on to Dinosaur, and we know that the protagonist Nina is openly autistic, but she kind of intimates that her colleague Declan is autistic too, although this is never confirmed by the character, but he is certainly autistic-coded, and they have various conversations in this show about a neurotypical person, but also they do talk about work as well because they're both paleontologists. So I'm going to say that this one very nearly gets a pass. Moving on to Patience, and again, Patience is a clearly defined autistic person. She confirms this in the show. and she does go to a group for autistic adults, and some of those are named in the show. Patience does have various conversations with the group leader, Billy, about one of his family members, and they're never confirmed as neurotypical or autistic in the show, so we don't know on that account, but we do see other autistic people talk about their difficulties at work in a group session, so I am going to give this one a pass. And moving on to Film Club, and this very nearly gets a pass. It's just really frustrating that they never actually say the words autism or autistic in the show, but I think the two main protagonists are very clearly autistic-coded, and we have confirmation that Evie is autistic outside of the show. It's just never confirmed in it. And both Evie and Noah talk consistently about their special interest, which is films. So, it's frustrating because I want to give it a pass, but yeah, not quite. Hopefully, if they do mention the word autistic or autism in series 2, then it will get a pass. So we'll just have to wait and see. And I also mentioned Mozart and the Whale earlier, and this does get a pass. Both the main protagonists are openly autistic, and they talk about various stuff going on in their lives. So for me, this does meet the criteria for the Bechdel Autism Variant Test. And as I said earlier, I am going to come back to this film in a future video. As we know, there are so few clearly defined autistic characters out there, characters who are explicitly autistic within the film or TV shows. So I think we're allowed to talk about headcanon today. And in terms of my own headcanon, I'm just going to mention one film here, and it's Nuts in May. And this is a Mike Leigh film that was made in the 70s, and I really love this film, if I'm honest, and I really resonate with the character of Candice Marie, but I think both her and her husband are really autistic-coded, and although they do have conversations about some neurotypical people in the film, they have endless conversations about things that really interest them as a couple. So for me, this is a film that almost meets the autism variants of this test. So while we're talking about autistic headcanon, all characters we personally believe may be autistic, I'm just showing a series of characters from film and TV who are considered to be autistic-coded, or at least according to some Reddit posts. And while I don't necessarily agree with all of them, I think what is striking here is the absolute lack of diversity. Seriously, what is going on? This is a clear indicator that intersectionality has barely been considered by the makers of these films and TV shows, and this desperately needs improvements so that we all feel represented. Although I should say that these are autistic-coded characters, they've not been confirmed as autistic. I think for me, it really demonstrates that autistic-coded characters often are a hackneyed, nerdy, awkward, or socially challenged character type or archetype, which is often used for the purposes of humour. I think also it's really notable how many characters here are from sitcoms or comedies, and this will be a conversation for another video as I've a lot to say on this. So I think when we look at all of these characters as a whole, it really does evidence the need for intelligently and sensitively written stories that feel authentic. We need a broad spectrum of actually autistic characters who are full of depth and nuance. So I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions on all of the films and TV shows I've mentioned today, because I'm just one autistic person, and what doesn't resonate for me may well resonate with you, and I would love to hear your reasons as to why. I would love to hear about any films or TV shows that you know would meet the autism variants of the Bechdel test down below, and as I think it's fairly obvious that there are so few examples where the characters are openly autistic or explicitly autistic, I think it's fine to include autistic-coded characters, so by all means leave your examples down below. I should say that pop culture is one of my special interests. As you'll see from the models behind me, I'm a pop culture artist, so this is an area that really interests me. So I don't doubt this is a theme that I'll come back to in future videos. So if there are any recommendations you have on films or TV shows that feature autistic characters, by all means leave those down below because I'd be really interested to hear. So yeah, I think that's going to be it for today. So give it a like if you got this far, a hype if you think it was worthy, and yeah, I'll see you again soon.